3 nights after the wedding, the altar flame turned violet and would not go out. Vronjara hadn't slept. She knew that color. She knew what it meant. Someone from Clan Den was still alive, and they had found her. The question was whether they had come to welcome her home, or to drag her back. The altar sat at the edge of the clearing, built from black stones with white veins, low and solid against the earth. Vronjara had finished it the week before the wedding. She had lit the first flame herself, with ignite stones and black oak bark, the way the elders of Clan Den had taught her before everything fell apart. It was supposed to burn for 1 night and go out on its own. It did not go out. On the first night, she thought it was the wind keeping it alive. She went back to bed and listened to Daren's steady breathing in the dark and told herself it was nothing. On the second night, she sat outside until past midnight, watching the flame burn low and constant, the color shifting slowly from orange to something deeper. By the third night, she did not go to bed at all. She sat on the ground in front of the altar with her knees pulled to her chest and watched the flame burn violet in the cold pre-dawn air. Violet was not a natural color for fire. Not for any fire built with wood and bark. In the shamanic tradition of Clan Den, violet meant one thing and one thing only, a summoning signal, a living member of the clan calling to another across distance, through the altar connection, the way the elders had once used fire to speak across mountains. Vronjara had not seen another living member of Clan Den in over 2 years. She pressed her fingers against the crystal adornments on her dress and breathed slowly. The flame held its color without flickering, steady, patient, like something that had been waiting a long time and had learned not to rush. When the sun came up on the 4th morning, she heard Daren moving inside the farmhouse. The smell of water heating on the stone stove drifted through the open window. She stood up, brushed the dirt from her dress, and walked inside. He was at the stove with his back to her. He turned when she came in and looked at her face for a moment, the kind of look that did not need words to read. "The altar," she said. "I know," he said. "I saw it last night from the window." She sat at the table. He poured 2 cups of hot water with dried herbs and set one in front of her without being asked. "Someone from my clan is alive," she said. "They found the altar. They are calling through it." Daren sat across from her and held his cup with both hands. "Where are they?" "The Valdrak Canyons," she said. "The signal comes from that direction." He was quiet for a moment. The flame outside was still visible through the window, violet and low. "When do we leave?" he asked. She looked at him across the table. He was not asking if she wanted to go. He was not asking if it was safe. He was asking when. "Tomorrow at dawn," she said. He nodded and drank his tea. They packed light. Daren took his rifle, his revolver, dried meat, hardtack, a wool blanket each, and a coil of rope. Vronjara took her bone knife, a pouch of ignite stones, bundles of dried black oak bark for fire and for ritual, and the small pouch of Clan Den crystals she kept tied to her belt. They rode out before the sun fully cleared the horizon, the clearing still grey and cool behind them. The trail to the Valdrak Canyons ran east from the farmhouse through thinning black oak forest. The trees grew shorter and more twisted as the ground turned rocky, roots clawing at pale stone rather than red earth. By mid-morning the forest had given way entirely to open canyon country, walls of black rock rising on both sides, narrow sky overhead, the air cooler and drier than the frontier flatlands. Vronjara rode slightly ahead. Her eyes moved across the canyon walls in slow, deliberate sweeps. The first symbol appeared on the 3rd bend. She pulled her horse to a stop and dismounted without a word. Daren stopped beside her and watched as she walked to the canyon wall and pressed her fingers against the marking, a series of lines and curves scratched into the black stone, the cuts pale and fresh, made within the last few days. "Clan Den?" Daren asked from the saddle. "Yes," she said. She traced each line slowly. These are summoning words, not a threat, not a warning, but not a welcome either. She looked at him over her shoulder. "But not yet," she said. They continued deeper into the canyons. More symbols appeared on the walls as they rode, each one freshly cut, each one a continuation of the same message. Vronyara read them as she rode in silence, taking in each marking without stopping again. By late afternoon, the canyon walls had grown tall enough to block the direct sun. The light came in at a sharp angle, turning the black stone amber and casting long shadows across the trail. The air smelled of cold rock and something faintly herbal, burnt black oak bark and dried root. A ritual smell, a clan smell. Vronyara slowed her horse to a walk. "Someone has been burning offerings here," she said quietly. "Recently and regularly." Daran scanned the canyon walls above them. Nothing moved. "How far in do you think they are?" he asked. "One more day," she said. "Maybe less." They made camp at a wide point in the canyon where the walls pulled back enough to give them sky overhead. Daran built a small fire with wood they had brought. Vronyara sat across from it and watched the flame burn orange and steady, not violet, not here. She exhaled slowly and ate without speaking. Daran ate beside her and did not push for conversation. The canyon around them was quiet in a way that felt less like emptiness and more like held breath. They broke camp before dawn and were riding again when the first pale light hit the top of the canyon walls. The symbols on the stone continued. Closer together now, more urgent in their arrangement, Vronyara read each one without stopping. On the second day's second hour of riding, they found the camp. It was set into a shallow alcove in the canyon wall, a hollow worn into the rock by centuries of wind, just deep enough to shelter a small fire from the canyon drafts. The fire was out, but the remains were clear, a ring of stones blackened by repeated use, ash still holding the faint shape of burnt offerings. Small animal bones arranged around the fire ring in a pattern that Vronyara recognized immediately as a clan den preservation ritual. A way of asking the ancestors to keep a lone survivor safe through another night. Clan crystals had been placed at even intervals around the fire ring, 6 of them, small, translucent, catching the early light. Vronyara dismounted and crouched beside the fire ring. She pressed her palm flat against the ash. "Still warm," she said. Daran had his hand on the revolver at his hip, not drawn, just ready. "They left in a hurry," he said, looking at the ground around the alcove. "Boot prints, 1 set, small." "Young," said Vronyara. She was looking at the bone arrangement around the fire ring. These preservation rituals, the elders taught them to the children first, so the children could perform them alone if they had to. She picked up one of the crystals from the ground and held it in her palm. It was the same type she wore on her own dress, gathered from the same mountain region where Clan Den had once travelled. She closed her fingers around it. "A child survived," she said, more to herself than to Daran. "They're still close," said Daran. "The ash is warm and the prints are fresh. They heard us coming and pulled back into the canyon somewhere nearby." Vronyara stood and turned slowly, scanning the canyon walls and the dark fissures in the rock face on either side of the alcove. She said nothing more, but she moved back to her horse and stood beside it calmly, making no sudden gestures, keeping her posture open and still. Daran understood. He took his hand off the revolver entirely and let it hang at his side. Then he sat down on a rock near the dead fire ring, pulled out a piece of hardtack from his coat pocket and began eating it slowly, as if he had simply decided to rest. They waited. They sat by the cold fire ring for nearly an hour. Daran ate. Vronyara was still. The canyon held its silence. Then a sound came from the narrow fissure in the rock face to the left, a scrape of boot leather against stone. Then stillness again. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shadow. He was young, 16 winters at most, though his eyes looked older, an orc, lean and too thin, wearing leather clothes that had been repaired so many times the original material was barely visible beneath the patches. His hair was black and roughly cut, as if done with a blade rather than any proper tool. Around his neck, on a cord of dried tendon, hung a single clan den crystal, larger than the ones around the fire ring, with a deep white vein running through its centre. He stopped at the edge of the alcove and looked at Vronjara. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he opened his mouth and said a single word in old orc tongue, low, careful, like something he had practiced saying alone for a long time, not knowing if he would ever get to say it to the right person. It was her birth name, the name given at the clan naming ceremony before she was old enough to remember, the name no one outside Clan Den had ever known, the name she had not heard spoken aloud in over 2 years. Vronjara's amber eyes went very still. "Who told you that name?" she said in old orc tongue. "My father," said the boy, "the elder, before he died." The canyon was completely silent around them. Daran sat without moving, watching, understanding nothing of the words, but reading everything in the posture of the 2 orcs, facing each other. "What is your name?" said Vronjara. "Vorn Den," said the boy. She looked at him for a long time. The crystal at his neck, the clan repair patterns on his clothes, the way he held his shoulders, the specific posture of Clan Den training, weight slightly forward, always ready, always balanced. Details that could not be faked by someone who had not grown up inside the clan. She walked to him and stopped an arm's length away, looking at his face carefully, the amber eyes, identical in color to hers, the way the clan crystals glinted at his throat. She placed her hand on his shoulder. He went very still under the weight of it. "You kept the rituals alive," she said. "Every night," he said. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. "I did not know if anyone would ever come. They built a fire in the alcove that night, a proper one with wood and black oak bark, and Vronjara added dried root from her supply pouch. The flame burned orange and steady, not violet. The summoning had been answered. There was no longer any need for it. Vorn sat across the fire from them and ate the dried meat and hardtack that Daran set in front of him without comment. He ate the way someone eats when they have been managing on too little for too long, controlled, not rushed, but thorough. Daran sat to the side and let Vronjara lead. She spoke to Vorn in old orc tongue for a long time, asking and listening in turn. Daran watched the fire and occasionally added wood when it needed it. The conversation slowed gradually as the night deepened. Vorn's answers grew shorter. His head dipped once, then steadied, then dipped again. Eventually he leaned back against the alcove wall, and his eyes closed and did not open again. His breathing evened out into the slow rhythm of deep sleep, the wool blanket pulled up to his chin. Vronjara watched him sleep for a moment. Then she turned to Daran and told him everything in English, her voice low so as not to wake the boy. Vorn was the youngest son of the clan elder, her father's cousin, which made him her blood. Though distant, he had been 12 winters old when the clan dispersal happened. He had survived by hiding in the canyon fissures while the adults tried to hold the attackers back. He had watched from the dark while the clan was broken apart. He had stayed in the canyons because he did not know where else to go, and because something in him refused to leave the last place where Clan Den had been whole. For 2 years he had maintained the rituals alone, kept the fire burning, kept the bone arrangements, kept the crystal placements, waiting for the ancestors to send someone. When Vronjara lit the wedding altar 3 nights ago, he had felt it through the canyon stones, the specific frequency of a clan den flame burning with intention. He had followed it. Daran listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the sleeping boy across the fire. "He kept an entire tradition alive by himself for 2 years, Daran said. At 12. "Yes," said Vronjara. Another silence. "The farmhouse has a small room," said Daran. "It has been used for storage. It would not take long to clear it." Vrognara looked at him. "He is not just a boy who needs a roof," she said carefully. "He is Clan Den. Taking him in means taking in the responsibility of what that means, the rituals, the language, the obligations to the ancestors." "I know," said Daran. "You know the words," she said, "but do you know what it means in practice?" He looked at her steadily. "I stood next to you during the wedding ritual for an hour without understanding a single word," he said, "and I would do it again every week if that is what it requires." She held his gaze for a long moment, then she turned back to the fire. "We leave at dawn," she said. Vorn did not trust Daran. He was not hostile. He was careful. There was a difference. He watched Daran with the specific attention of someone who has learned that humans are unpredictable and that the gap between a calm expression and a violent action can be very small. He answered when Daran spoke to him. He accepted food when it was offered. But he kept distance, and his eyes tracked Daran's hands whenever they moved near his belt. Vrognara noticed. She did not correct it. Trust was not something that could be instructed into existence. It had to be built the slow way. On the second morning of the return ride, they stopped to water the horses at a shallow creek that ran through a wide section of the canyon. Daran crouched at the creek's edge to fill the water pouches. Vorn stood a few feet away, watching. Daran looked up at him. "You speak any frontier common?" he asked. Vorn was silent for a moment. "Some," he said. His accent was thick, but the word was clear. "Good enough," said Daran, and went back to filling the pouches. Vorn watched him for a moment longer. "Why did you come?" Vorn said. Daran looked up again. "She needed to come," he said simply. "So I came with her." "Humans do not come." "Not for orcs," said Vorn. The words were flat, not angry, just stating what he had learned to be true. "This one does," said Daran. He handed the filled water pouch up to Vorn without standing. Vorn took it after a brief pause. That evening they camped at the last bend before the canyon mouth, where the black rock walls began to shorten and the black oak forest reappeared on the edges of the trail. Vrognara built a small ritual fire and sat beside it. Vorn settled near her. Daran made the cooking fire a respectful distance away and prepared the meal. After eating, Vorn reached into the front of his leather jacket and pulled out a small flat stone, black with a white vein, no larger than a palm. He held it toward Vrognara. "My father carried this," he said in old orc tongue. "He told me to give it to the next elder of Clan Den." Vrognara took the stone with both hands. She held it for a long time. "I'm not an elder," she said. "You are the oldest surviving member," said Vorn. "That is enough." She closed her fingers around the stone and held it against her chest for a moment. Then she placed it carefully into the crystal pouch at her belt. Across the cooking fire, Daran watched without understanding the words and added more wood to the flame. They reached the farmhouse on the afternoon of the fourth day. The altar at the edge of the clearing was cold. The violet flame had gone out on its own the morning after they left, as if it had accomplished what it needed to accomplish. Vorn stood at the edge of the clearing for a long moment, looking at the farmhouse. The dark wood walls, the low fence around the vegetable garden, the stone stove chimney, the black oak arch still standing between the two trees from the wedding. He had not been inside a building in 2 years. Daran went ahead and opened the farmhouse door. He walked through the main room to the small door at the back that led to the storage room. A narrow space with rough walls, a single window, and 2 years' worth of crates and bundled tools stacked against every surface. He started moving things out without ceremony. Vrognara stood at the farmhouse entrance beside Vorn, who had stopped at the threshold and was looking at the interior from the doorway, the table, the stone stove, the shelves with clay pots, the tools on the wall. taking it in piece by piece, the way someone does when they are deciding whether a place is safe before committing their weight to it. "You do not have to decide anything today," she said in Old Orc tongue. "I am deciding," he said. He was looking at the altar through the open door behind her. "I watched the flame for 3 nights from the canyon entrance before I sent the signal. I needed to know if it was real." "And?" "The flame was real," he said, "and the human came into the canyons without being asked and sat down and waited without reaching for his weapon." He paused. "My father said that the measure of a person is what they do when they have nothing to gain. He had nothing to gain in those canyons." Vronjara was quiet. "Come inside," she said. Vaughn stepped through the threshold and walked slowly through the main room, taking in each detail as he passed. The table, the stove, the single window facing the clearing. He stopped at the small door at the back, where Darren was still moving crates out, and looked through the opening at the narrow room beyond. Then he stepped inside it. By evening the storage room was fully cleared. There was a bedroll on the floor, a folded blanket, and a small clay pot for a candle. It was modest, it was private, it was his. Vaughn stood in the room and looked at the single window which faced east toward the canyons. He did not say anything, but he stayed. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm, slower at first, with the careful adjustments of 3 people learning to share space, and then gradually more natural, the way a new season settles in without announcing itself. Vaughn worked. That was the first thing that became clear about him. He was up before Vronjara most mornings, which meant he was up before the sun, and he had already identified every task on the property that needed doing, and ranked them by urgency before Darren had finished his first cup of morning tea. He fixed the fence section in the western pasture that had been leaning since autumn. He cleared the drainage channel behind the barn that had been partially blocked by root growth. He did these things without being asked and without drawing attention to having done them. Darren noticed. He said nothing about it directly, but one morning he left a pair of proper work gloves on the fence post where Vaughn had been working, sized correctly, bought the previous week in red stone. Vaughn wore them without comment. The ritual life of the farmhouse expanded. Vronjara taught Vaughn the wedding altar ceremony, the one she had performed for the ancestors after the marriage, and he added the names of the clan Den dead that he carried in memory, names she had not known, filling in the gaps of what she thought had been lost. Together, they extended the altar structure, adding a second tier of black stones that Vaughn selected carefully from the canyon edge on a day trip he made alone, returning with a full pack and a specific satisfaction in his expression. Darren watched the altar grow and asked no questions about its structure. He simply made sure the Ignite stone supply was always full. One evening after the ritual fire, the 3 of them sat together in the main room, Darren at the table with a cup of tea, Vronjara on the bench with the flat stone from the clan elder in her hands, Vaughn on the floor with his back against the wall and his knees up, sharpening his bone knife with a flat stone, the way Vronjara did. "Teach me a word," said Darren. Vaughn looked up. "Old Orc tongue," said Darren. "One word, something useful." Vaughn looked at Vronjara. She gave no expression. It was his choice. He thought for a moment. "Den," he said. "It means to hold, to keep, to not let go of what matters." Darren repeated it carefully. Vaughn almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. A month after Vaughn came to the farmhouse, Vronjara performed the clan Den recognition ritual at sunset in the clearing. It was not a large ceremony. There were no witnesses other than Darren, who stood to the side in his usual way, present still respectful of what he did not fully understand. The altar fire burned violet for the first time since the summoning, which meant the ancestors were present and attending. Vronjara sang the recognition verses in Old Orc tongue, her voice low and steady. The same rhythm she had used in the cave in the mountains years ago. The same rhythm Daran had heard without understanding while he recovered from a broken leg in the snow. Vaughn responded in the correct answering verses without hesitation or error. 2 years of solitary practice had kept them precise and clean. When the final verse ended, Vrognyara placed both hands on Vaughn's shoulders and spoke his formal recognition as a living member of Clan Den in good standing. His obligations, his rights, his place in the line of memory going back to the first elder. The altar flame held violet for another breath, then returned to orange, then went out. The 3 of them stood in the clearing in the last of the evening light. The black oak trees moved in the warm wind. The farmhouse behind them was lit from inside, the stone stove burning low and steady. Daran walked over to them. He stopped in front of Vaughn and extended his hand. Not the way men shook hands at trading posts, quick and transactional, but slowly with the deliberate weight of someone making a clear statement. Vaughn looked at the hand, then at Daran's face. Then he took it. They shook once. Firm, equal. That night, the 3 of them ate together at the table. The first time all 3 had sat at the table at the same meal, no one eating separately, no one positioned at a distance. Daran had made the root broth with dried meat, the same thing he had made the first night Vrognyara came to the farmhouse. He had made 3 portions. Vaughn looked at the bowl in front of him and then at Daran. "You always make 3 now?" he asked in frontier common, slow and careful. "I always make enough," said Daran. After the meal, Vaughn went to his room. Daran cleaned the bowls at the basin. Vrognyara sat at the table with the flat stone from the clan elder in her hands, turning it slowly. "He is going to be all right," said Daran from the basin. "Yes," she said. "He is." She set the stone on the table and looked out the window toward the altar at the edge of the clearing. The night was quiet. The canyons were dark and still to the east, but she had felt it again that evening during the ritual. A low vibration in the canyon stones, different from Vaughn's signal, older and deeper. Not urgent, not hostile, simply present. Something that had been in those canyons long before Clan Den arrived and would be there long after. Daran dried his hands and came to sit across from her. "You felt something," he said. It was not a question. "During the ritual," she said. "From deeper in the canyons, something old." He looked at her steadily. "The kind of old that can wait?" he asked. "For now," she said. "But not forever." He nodded slowly. Outside, the black oak leaves moved in the warm night wind. The altar sat cold and dark at the edge of the clearing, and somewhere deep in the Valdrak canyons, further than Vaughn had ever gone, further than the Clan Den symbols on the walls, something ancient turned slowly in the dark, patient and waiting for the right moment to make itself known.